Dr. Scott, people are doubting the official stories about Jeffrey Epstein. I don't know if a lot of people realize that you are a PhD. How are you today, Scott?
I'm doing very well, Jason. It's good to be with you.
Remind us quickly what you are a doctor of.
Well, I got my doctorate in political theory and my master's in public policy in Washington, D.C. when I moved out to Washington, and my bachelor's was in advertising out here in California. But I worked for the Bush administration. I worked for Heritage Foundation, a think tank, conservative think tank, before the Bush administration. And then I went into Booz Allen Hamilton, where I worked in the defense contracting realm, and also was given a direct commission in the Army to work simultaneously in Booz Allen Hamilton in the Army in psychological warfare and counterterrorism, counterterrorism finance. So I've been at State Department, SOCOM, Special Operations Command, Central Command, with a top secret SCI clearance. So I've been in a lot of areas where terrorism, economic development, counterterrorism, political stability, all of these things mixed and matched in Washington. So these kind of things that I see going on now are part of that palette of colors, should we say.
Absolutely. And again, you're not, publicizing that PhD that much, and I just wanted to let everybody know because modesty is such a rare commodity these days. People who watch our show regularly on Thursdays at noon Eastern are going to be aware that Scott is also the author of Shell Game, and you can pick up a copy of that at shellgamewhistleblower.com. That's Scott's website. People can also sponsor Scott on patreon.com/shellgame. And Scott joins me every week to share his insights in breaking news, developing stories, topics of interest to conservative-minded viewers, and particularly topics that are not covered by the mainstream news. Now, Scott, there's been a lot of coverage of this Jeffrey Epstein death, the alleged suicide. A lot of people in our audience are doubting the official story. I've been trying to reach the Department of Justice Public Information Officer as well as the Office of the Medical Examiner this morning. Nobody answering phones, voicemails full, text messages not being responded to. I've been unable to find a copy of this autopsy report that was supposedly released last night. We're just hearing, sort of reporting. Who has the autopsy report?
Well, it would be his lawyers who would have it, as of course. The lawyers representing him would have every document that relates to his existence. And the Bureau of Prisons, of course, are responsible for his custody. That is the federal agency. I'm not sure if they had him in a federal holding facility or a contracted holding facility. But
definitely
the Bureau
federal.
of Prisons.
Definitely federal. They had him. We've heard quite a lot about the infamous Manhattan, I should say the Municipal Correction Center here in downtown Manhattan. I went right over there on Saturday when we had heard that he committed suicide. No press conference, no public viewing of Epstein's body. There were these photographs in the Washington Post where, to me, his nose looks different than recent photographs of him. People are saying that the curves in his ears look different. Those are pretty significant identifiers. Interesting thing that you shared with me last night, Scott, is that while we're talking about the Federal Bureau of Prisons, this warden that's been now assigned to the Municipal Correction Center is the same warden of the prison that you were railroaded into after you revealed the connections between the Union Bank of Switzerland, Booz Allen Hamilton figures like Dov Zakheim, Covington and Burling, Eric Holder, Lanny Brewer, Shalala, Clintons. So what's the story with this warden? What can you tell us about that?
Well, it's let's dig up the storybook and get the crackling fire going. Just the short version is in Shell Game at the very back of the book. I thank a lot of the guys that I was in with and that helped me and that educated me, particularly the lawyers. And some of the other people that I gave thanks to were the prison staff. And one of them was James Petrucci. James Petrucci, the director of Federal Prison Camp Schuylkill, a man of leadership, discipline, and flexibility. You represent the best of the Army's old guard. James Petrucci was an Army old guard enlisted guy. And I say, I thank you for allowing me the press interviews with NBC News and the Washington Post, even though Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger ran away from the story like men paralyzed with fear. They also later to attempt to entrap the President Trump and his sons with it by inventing a false Russian election meddling narrative, but that's another story. So, Jason, you couldn't make this up. I didn't make this up. I didn't intend this to happen. But on page, the little V with two eyes, on the dedications, you'll have between Mr. Timothy Wood and Mr. Crystal Light, a guy named James Petrucci. And it was my, mentioning and thanking him because James Petrucci was the warden at the prison camp that I was at who came and got me and said, Bennett, you've got an interview with a couple people. And I said, oh, okay. And I thought it was military. I had been approached the day before by two other guards who were Marine Corps and Navy, old guys in their 50s. They had been retired, but they liked me because, military guys have a, friendship with each other. And they said, hey, Bennett, you've got an interview tomorrow. Don't tell anybody that we told you. And I said, okay, thank you. And the next day, I get called in by Petrucci, and he says, okay, we've got this interview. Come on with me. And he walks me into this big room. And it was quite dramatic because he walks in and here's Tom Hamburger and Michael Isikoff from NBC News and the Washington Post. And they stand up when I come in the room like they're greeting some superior officer. And Petrucci says, and this is Scott Bennett. And as if he's introducing Hannibal Lecter in that scene from Silence of the Lambs. And I didn't know them. I didn't expect anything. But then I sat down with them for 2 hours and explained all of Shell Game and the terrorist financing and Brad Birkenfeld and Edward Snowden and Julian Assange and the Clinton Foundation and all the members of Congress that I'd sent this, gave them copies of the documents and the reports. And the only thing that they said back to me was, Mr. Bennett, why do you think the CIA would do this? And I had never mentioned the CIA until that point, and it was at that point I knew they were in CIA, and that all stemmed from James Petrucci. So was James Petrucci a CIA a help, asset, contractor, friend? Yeah. That's still coming out, but it's very interesting that he has now been put into this key position. And I honestly like Petrucci. When I knew him, he was a big, everybody feared him. He was loud and this and that, but I wasn't intimidated or shocked by anybody. So he looked at me like, who is this guy? Is he CIA? Is he military? And he'd ask me, Bennett, what did you do exactly? And how did this happen? And I said, well, blah, 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 blah. And he just couldn't get around or get inside in any way. So I was left alone by all of them. But it's fascinating that now Petrucci is in charge or been put in a position where he can cover up, Jason, all of the stuff you're looking for or make it very, very easy to clean up. Right. And that's what I think we're witnessing here is they're bringing in Petrucci as a cleanup guy because he's excellent at that. He is a military-minded old Army guy, so he'll come in and run it like a very tight ship. And he will scare the hell out of everybody to shut everybody up. He's very, very domineering, and he will tighten up the whole thing. And everything that happened at that prison will disappear. So now really what needs to happen, of course, is to track. The medical staff in the prison would have had all the records on the medical Epstein. Conditions and the... Yeah. And the medical conditions and the medications and anything else he was taking, the medical records division would have that. They always have a staff director there to handle emergencies. They have nurses there. So it's not like they don't have a medical staff. So the medical staff would have been the first ones to see Epstein, and then they would have called in and taking them to paramedics and stuff. So
So
there are multiple
let's
layers.
just go over a couple things, Scott. Sorry to interrupt you there, but I want to remind everybody that Michael Isikoff, the guy who came to meet you in prison, who you briefed about the information that ultimately went into your book Shell Game, this is the same guy who was writing for Yahoo News. That was one of the original, he was one of the originators of the the urination story, the Steele dossier. Yeah. I mean, isn't it shocking that any person, particularly the President of the United States, could be accused of something like that? We've got no videotape of Trump walking into a hotel in Moscow. We've got no register from the hotel. We've got no flight logs of Mr. Trump's personal jet being in Moscow. They just made up this story, presented zero evidence whatsoever. Get this guy, Michael Isikoff, and a couple of other rejects from I don't know where to write some stories, and suddenly we have an investigation that goes on for years, that stymies the presidency, throws the nation into turmoil, and ultimately results in nothing. So it's interesting that that guy would be connected to your story as well. Now, this morning, you've been telling me it's your feeling that Mr. Epstein is in the witness protection program. Why do you say that?
Well, I think it's the common sense thing to do when you have an intelligence asset that has a wealth of material that is very valuable and can be traded for, if I put on my intelligence and counterintelligence hat, for pressure and influence operations on foreign governments and foreign leaders. I mean, the honeypot works both ways. And if there's something to be useful, it's the extortion of people using videotapes of them sexually abusing little girls and little boys. And all of the people that have traveled and been associated with Epstein are candidates for that sort of a blackmail operation. So the most important thing is to empty the memory banks of Epstein and give him whatever he wants in exchange for that, if it's a valuable trade. And I think that's how they would look at it. That's how I would look at it. And Trump would probably look at it. And anybody in the military and anyone in the intelligence sectors would look at it. They'd be advising Trump, hey, the moment the moment Trump came into office, and the people who worked at DIA and CIA, despite all of the stuff that's been happening on the Russia hoax nonsense and the burning of rubber tires to try and confuse the air, and going after Mueller, the demented old man going after people, all of that was a lot of noise, a lot of firecrackers, but there's no real artillery damage there. There's no substance whatsoever. So the real intelligence people around Trump, and I've talked to people like Senator Dick Black about this too. Epstein represents a great pustule with all sorts of poison that just needs to be squeezed. And you can
You've got such a great way of describing stuff, Scott. It's unbelievable. I just want to take you to another point for a moment, not to interrupt you, but I want you to talk about this a bit. The New York Post has been doing some really excellent reporting on this. Apparently, Epstein had, I don't know if this is a painting or a photograph or what, but yeah, it's a painting of Bill Clinton in a dress and high heels in the Oval Office. This is, of course, the blue dress that Monica Lewinsky famously failed to take to the dry cleaners, perhaps endeavoring to conduct her own entrapment scheme. But don't you think this indicates a total lack of concern? I mean, Monica Lewinsky really was a 20-year-old woman at the time, pretty young, pretty immature. She made a mistake, caught up with a very powerful man who, by all accounts, is extremely charismatic. Her life has essentially been ruined. I don't think anybody could go on a date with Monica Lewinsky after this without thinking about this, and as I understand it, she hasn't been married. Isn't this the most callous, ridiculous type of thing to have on display?
Well, I think it's probably one of the instruments that Jeffrey Epstein uses for his masturbatory entertainment while getting these massages, is to gaze up at that picture of Bill Clinton and pleasure himself. I have no doubt of the depth of his depravity.
I think it's more about mocking Monica Lewinsky and showing that they have no concern for these victims. These are a group of individuals who treat humans the way most people treat a pair of shoes. They just use them as they like and throw them away when they're done with it, abuse them and all that. People in the comments are asking us who put the new warden in the prison, and it's an excellent question. As I understand it, it was William Barr, the U.S. Attorney General. And the strange thing is, when we search for this warden, Lamine, the original warden, is supposedly somebody named Lamine Dene or something like that, but there are no photographs of this person. That's a pretty unique name, and when you search for it, we get this guy who is like a soccer player. This does not appear to be the prison warden. This is a guy in Congo, and what's going on? Do we know if that is actually the warden?
Well, no. I mean, these are the little cover-ups and the escape valves that they can use, but they can be ferreted out because, as you've observed, that prison has been there for a while, so it hasn't just popped up overnight. So that there are records of the staff, there are records of the visitation, there are records of people who have been there.
Because you told me yesterday we should be able to check this website and find out who the warden was. That name is not listed anywhere on this website.
Yeah, that's the mystery. Is the Bureau of Prisons usually has a database of its facilities, and on that database of their facilities, they have the warden, the contact information, the Office of Public Affairs, and really that's the one that should yield the name of the warden that was there. I mean, it's very bizarre. If it's not easy to find and easy to get and an easy answer, which is, hey, who was the warden that just left, that James Petrucci is, or you know what you could always do? You could call the jail itself and go to Petrucci's office and say, I want to talk to James Petrucci, and they'll get you through to his office, and you ask him or leave a message, who was the warden that you just replaced? What was his name?
Might be a good way for me to end up in that jail. I just lost you there.
No,
sorry,
I mean it's hard to get there, but there will be found out unless it's a total cover up. And you're right. Let me tell you something. After I met with Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger, remember Tom Hamburger too had a role in this too. Tom Hamburger wrote the story that tried to say Donald Trump Jr. got copies of the WikiLeaks cables before they were released, and CNN and everybody tried to publish that. And then they got the timestamp wrong, and it fell apart. So Tom Hamburger and Isikoff are joint CIA assets. I have no doubt about that at all. But Isikoff was always also in Ukraine, stirring up the Ukraine intel against Manafort and other things. But
Manafort's in that MCC. We should mention Paul Manafort remains incarcerated in that municipal correction center, so he's got to be feeling pretty nervous. We've got that Tartagliucci or whatever his name is, the Briarcliff Manor ex-cop who's wanted for quadruple murder, still in there.
Well, see, that's the other odd thing about it, and I've been in the belly of the beast, so I know how these things happen. They never put a person of low violence, especially with child sexual pedophilia, pornography issues, they never put them into containment with prisoners of violence, robbery, guns, anything like that. Murder, especially murder or rape. No, they're not mixed with people who are in there for financial crimes or probationary crimes, or even drug crimes or child pornography crimes. And I know this when I was grabbed by Obama's people and put into the temporary place in Florida. And remember, just because it's a federal crime does not mean that you're put into a federal holding facility. They go through a process. I was in a Florida holding facility, which is a big cement box, which is not very nice at all, for a month. It was over a month or so, and then they move you to a federal holding box. Then they send you back and forth for court and stuff. But they don't put you into a population that you're at risk. So the mere suggestion that he was in with a roommate or someone was there that had been suspected of killing 4 guys or something is totally inconsistent with Bureau of Prison policy. Never mind that when you're on suicide watch too, you're always watched. You're in a very contained area, and also you really don't have the means to hurt yourself when you're on a suicide watch condition. But I think
mean,
everybody
Scott,
knows that.
this guy looks
That's
like
why
a
they doubt the
Spider-Man
story.
villain, doesn't he? I mean, this is one of the most muscle-bound individuals I've ever observed. He could kill anybody with
Yeah.
his bare hands.
Yeah, yeah. I knew a guy like that actually when I was he was a Russian mobster. Of course, he liked me because I was doing the typing for him and his boss and getting their license back and stuff like that. But yeah, this type of guy, no, I think the whole thing really is a scam, Jason. I mean, because Epstein has intelligence on the Clintons, on British and foreign affairs people, on who knows, the Mossad, CIA, the nexus of this, international money and banks. Never mind the Saudis and the foreign intel that most likely were acquired. And also this is not just coming over to an island and having little rape parties and then going back home. This probably involves the death and sacrifice of some of these kids because some things, it takes you back to the movie Hostel.
Yeah.
They're not into letting things go. They're into some of the most warped, demonic, depraved activities that you can imagine. So I think there's a lot of stuff that is probably known and examined, and he's being held into further things. You may never hear about it again. He also could be released, as people have said, back to Israel in exchange for certain things. But I do not think at all that he is dead.
Yeah.
So it matches a deception operation. And then the next question is, okay, how is this being used? Is this being used to help the American people, to help track down where these violations have occurred for the last 10 years? Or is this being used to cover up Trump and his complicity and other people, against the interests of the United States? I hope it's the former.
Yeah. The director of Hostel was in my Sight and Sound film class at NYU, so that's an interesting little factoid. People in the comments, Scott, are asking us what's up with this Shirley Skipper Scott. She was initially incorrectly reported as the warden. Now we're hearing that she was the associate warden. Doesn't this whole flow of incorrect information, people who have no online presence in terms of pictures of this Petrucci guy, this seems very typical of all of these types of events. It seems rare that something like this happens and we have a press conference where they describe in detail what happened. They show photos, coroner's photos. They have interviews with the guys. We haven't seen any video from the prison. I mean, this is very much like Soviet Union 1970. We've got the official word from Pravda, and everything else you got to shut up and go away. But this Shirley Skipper Scott, she doesn't seem like she was the warden. And, do you have any images of Petrucci? Are you aware of him being pictured anywhere?
Oh, I've got him. I've got him tattooed on my mind, and I'll never forget his face. I'll never forget any of the people that were up there, and I saw. It's an experience. I haven't looked for the pictures of Petrucci. That would be something that you probably could if you type in James Petrucci school kill, SCHUYKILL, KILL, school kill. FCI school kill was where he was at, and
is he a heavy metal guitar player? Because this doesn't look like him.
No, that's certainly not him.
So that's what I mean. It seems like there's a lot of people that we talk about on Crowdsource the Truth who you type in their name and you get nothing. That seems like a really difficult thing to do. Let's check DuckDuckGo, because a lot of people don't seem to think that Google's going to give us any returns that are, valid. And of course, the recent reporting.
It's one T. One T, I believe. Yeah.
The recent reporting
CCI,
from Project Veritas and True Pundit regarding what Google is actually up to. Now, I mean, this is bizarre, Scott. Is this him?
No.
So what's going on? We put in this guy's name, we get all these weird impressionistic paintings of, I mean, there's like a Rorschach test over here, and then there's a heavy metal guy with the same name. We're not going to see an image of this guy. I
Yeah,
guess it
that's
stands to
very, very
reason
bizarre.
that a warden of prisons would want a certain degree of online anonymity. But again, it's just one of these things that keeps coming up again and again. People in the comments are telling us that the red shoes that Bill Clinton is wearing in that painting is an MK Ultra signal. We've heard a lot about cartel signaling. There was that image that you and I were reviewing of Donald Barr, the father of William Barr, the current Attorney General, the guy who was the headmaster at Dalton School where Jeffrey Epstein worked. A lot of people make the point of reminding me that Donald Barr had left the Dalton School prior to Jeffrey Epstein's employment, but it was pretty close time proximity that they were both involved at that school, and it certainly would be a great way to claim you had nothing to do with it to leave. The strangest thing I found about this image of Mr. Barr, Donald Barr, he's got 6 pens in his breast pocket here, and one of our viewers has contacted me to alert me that there's a little thing in between the pens separating them there. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is apparently signaling, Masonic symbology indicating 33. I take that as a valid point, because who the hell needs 6 pens in their breast pocket? I think 1 looks stupid, 2 would be ridiculous, 3 is just beyond redundant, 4, why would you need 4? How do you get to 6 pens? Is the guy a pen salesman? Even if he is, that's not selling them, that looks stupid. He also has, I mean, this is maybe minor, but seems to have the same kind of eyebrows as Michael Aquino, the former general who was a Satanist and the founder of, what was it, the Church of Set or something like that, which he was embroiled, Aquino was embroiled in some sort of child rape scandal in California in the 90s. What is going on here, Scott? Is this all conspiracy theory ridiculousness, or are we onto something?
Well, you know, the oddity also always exposes some sort of a personality dysfunction or quirkiness or ostentatiousness, which is always down the path of some perversion or you know, sense of you know, outlandish, or the laws and the norms of society do not apply to you, and you have this illusion of greatness, of power, of intellect, or whatever the qualities or characteristics that that give you license to be that odd. But you know, and one thing regarding Petrucci, I've looked at this too, and this weird cover-up that seems to be developing. Petrucci was the warden also at FCI Otisville, where Michael Cohen is now. Ooh. So Michael Cohen and James Petrucci have been having some conversations, most likely about Scott Bennett having conversations with Michael Cohen. And you know, other things perhaps. So it makes a possible explanation. So you see Petrucci and Cohen in the same prison, and Petrucci meets all of his people. And I mean, everything that I've reported and done has gotten to the people in Congress and the White House. So, and it was given directly to Michael Cohen. So whatever discussions have been going on. So Petrucci and Cohen is very interesting, and now Petrucci and Epstein is very interesting, and Petrucci and Bennett and Michael Isikoff and Tom Hamburger is very interesting. So you see this guy bouncing around some very key people, not that Epstein had anything other than he had a connection to Swiss banks and Deutsche Bank and money, and then all of the honeypot intelligence operations. So that's linked to CIA. So you know, it won't surprise me if Petrucci is a sort of invisible man on public tracking and public media and stuff like that. But you know, you're victim to the limitation of information which the intelligence agencies and the government and the lobotomized mainstream media are exposing people to. So the most important thing, I think, is to turn off the mainstream media and their propagandistic, repetitive lies about he's dead, he's dead, he's dead. You know, autopsy this and that, and okay, well, don't believe any of it. Believe your own eyes, believe the documents, make the phone calls, track down the inmates that were at that facility that Petrucci has gone to, the new place. There should be inmates there, inmate numbers that can confirm who it was. And of course, I think the Bureau of Prisons Office of Public Affairs, they should have a press. They always have a department too for arranging inmates visits, visitation areas. That's the place that always gets the phone calls. So you can call the visitation department, or you can also call the education department. This is a back road, a back channel, a back door. So if you call the prison, whatever it is, Metropolitan Correction Center, ask to connect with the education department or the prisoner visitation department that arranges passes and all that, or you can ask to connect with the medical department and see if you can get a hold of some live person picking up the phone, and then go from there. Ask who you're talking with, what their name is, their department, and say, I need to know who the warden was, who preceded James Petrucci, who was the warden that was just there, and see if they'll tell you. And if they don't, then they're covering it up and hiding it. And then you ask, well, I need to know it. Who do I talk to get this?
I think we might be a little late to the party to do that. You might have been able to get away with it on Saturday when, amid the confusion before everybody working in that prison was told, don't say anything to anybody. This is very clearly the pattern that's followed, after 9/11. They start pushing out their story. This is what David Hawkins would call artificial reality. We haven't seen the photographs of the guards that were allegedly asleep. We haven't seen video of the hallway. Very curious that there's no video of the cell itself. When you were in a federal prison, was there video of your cell the whole time?
No, they don't have that. There's no video cameras in the cells.
But you weren't awaiting trial, and you weren't possibly the most important witness in one of the biggest crimes in history. So we've heard that there was a video surveillance thing going on at the cell. And how many inmates were in the facility that you were in? This is a temporary facility for holding people who are awaiting trial. It's not a prison. This is a federal jail.
Yeah, it's a holding facility, which means you have, in his case, if there is a suicide watch situation, most likely you would have a video camera up there because you've got an individual that you're feeling is going to kill himself when you turn your back or he walks in the door. So they may have something like that. He was also, I believe, in the SHU, which was the high protected defensive area. Yeah, and it's you're in there alone. The SHU is a place that you're in there alone, and you stay there all day, and you get out, once a day to exercise usually, but you're in your cell. That's one of the things they did to Manafort. They left him in his cell all day, and he would get out, to walk around a little bit for exercise and go back in. He really has been tortured. That's what people need to know. The Bureau of Prisons and this whole environment in America, they really do torture guys by not letting them get outside. You can't see the sunshine or feel the air or touch the grass. You're in a big cement box, sleeping on metal beds with a pad about 1.5 inches thick, with no pillow. They don't give you a pillow either, and you're just given an orange jumpsuit, no socks. You're given a T-shirt, but then you have to make do and find your own way. It really is a Japanese prison camp in World War II. It's not a nice place. So,
and Scott, as recently as June 18th, Reuters is reporting that Manafort, who's 70, is in fact in the Metropolitan Correction Center here for tax fraud, and he's in there with the same type of guy as that juggernaut from Westchester, the former cop. This is so strange to me, Even the Yonkers Times, I don't know, this is not the New York Times, this is a pretty small local outlet, I would think. It's news in Yonkers. They knew August 5th that this dirty Westchester ex-cop was Epstein's cellmate. I mean, people are basically saying that this Epstein death, or the alleged death, is similar to Benghazi in that if you, as you said, you put an accused and convicted child rapist in a cell with someone who is like, could snap a World Wrestling Federation neck like a twig. You put those guys together in the cell, turn off the video cameras and go to sleep. What do we expect to happen?
Well, yeah. You're not going to kill yourself in an environment that you have absolutely no physical enablements. You don't have any instruments. You have very thin sheets. You usually, if you're on suicide watch, sometimes I think they even put you in a straitjacket. So the whole notion is not based on the reality or the proper, the environment that is existing in these places. They make it where you are extremely confined and limited in your ability to do these sort of things. So what really I think we're going to see happening is you're going to see an increase in the targeting and the arrests and the investigations of all of the people that Epstein has on his little black book, and that's probably going to be the next phase out, is how Barr, the Attorney General, who has been essentially the one who appointed James Petrucci, how Barr and the Department of Justice is going to be utilizing Epstein's information. Now, the question also many people have raised, has he been shuttled away to Switzerland for plastic surgery? Is he on his way to Israel? Is he, because of the Mossad implications and stuff like that? Who knows? It's still being developed. But
exactly.
there's a lot of other things that we need to pay attention to too, because this could be, one of the major things that brings down the Clinton machine and a lot of the other aspects of this. There was, one other thing I wanted to get into at your discretion, but we were talking about New York and all of this stuff, and one of the things that came up was a lot of the 9/11 things pertaining to New York. And I don't know if you've heard this or not, but the 9/11 Commission, the Lawyers Commission for 9/11, that has a legal action in the Second District of New York, has just filed a letter from the New York Fire Chiefs Bureau, the New York commissioners, in which all of these New York fire commissioners who are in full uniform, firemen, have demanded that an investigation be done and that all of the exhibits and the documentation that the Lawyers Committee has submitted be reviewed in a grand jury environment for explosives that were used to destroy the Twin Towers and cause the deaths of the firemen that were called in and the first responders. So this is a huge development. I think it's going to be awakening of the entire population of potential firemen, because they do have a paramilitary character to them. They do have sort of that Batman heroic affection in the minds of the American people. And if the firemen are standing up and signing a letter demanding that 9/11 be investigated for explosives that were used inside the building to bring it down, then every fireman across America, and in the world for that matter, has a potential to stand side by side with these fire people. And you could see the whole 9/11 thing exploding and disintegrating like never before. So that opens up, is that going to facilitate more of these false flag shootings and international events? Are you going to see the world become a lot more tumultuous as things like this, the truth, get raised up and become more and more clear?
So you feel like this Jeffrey Epstein episode is somehow intended to offset people's attention from this 9/11, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 inquiry?
Well, I don't think it's meant to offset it. I just think that's one of the things that's simultaneously happening. And remember, when all of these things are happening, there's some weird oddities. Why did you have an alleged shooting in Walmart that makes no sense, that it looks like was a false flag, similar to the Christchurch shooting, which we know was a false flag. We know was fake and fabricated.
The evidence we saw in the video showed signs of
Yes.
being false evidence. We do believe that people were killed in Christchurch. There's other people I've spoken, I should say I believe. I've spoken to other people who have been there, spoken to victims, witnesses, etc. But again, there's that strange disconnect where we've got a video of one location, we've got a shooting in another location, no video from that other location, tons of coverage. It just reeks of being a distraction. Look over here. We've got hats flying
Yes.
off from gunshots, but heads not being affected by bullets. Very strange. So here we've got numerous articles from numerous outlets describing how surveillance footage was reviewed, but why haven't we seen it? This is supposed to be a free country, by the people, for the people, and of the people. That's a federal facility. The video footage of a person who has done a crime against the public by raping and trafficking in young girls, we, the public, should have a right to see that, or at very least, why is there not a press conference with Mr. Biazzi from the Department of Justice, the warden of prisons? This has just been totally obfuscated. We're just, hearing little pieces of reporting. Who knows if it's true, what it's based on. In Yonkers, they knew this cop was his cellmate. For days, I've been hearing equivocation about that, if he was or was not, if he was moved, if he wasn't moved. It's crazy.
Yeah. And that's right. Where are the Freedom of Information Act requests? Where is the actual digging up a lot of the material? The other connection of this too, let's not forget, is Rene Alexander Acosta. Rene Alexander Acosta, who was the one who originally was the U.S. attorney in Florida that gave the sweetheart deal, as they describe it, to Epstein. Rene Alexander Acosta was involved was really the prosecutor of the Brad Birkenfeld Swiss Bank $780 million deal that came over in 2009. So Rene Alexander Acosta not only did the Jeffrey Epstein deal, but he also worked with Eric Holder and Lanny Brewer and Loretta Lynch and Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and the law firm Covington and Burling and the Swiss government to get all of the material that Brad Birkenfeld brought over, bury it, confiscate it, hide it, and then prosecute and throw Brad Birkenfeld in prison and deny him his appeals, deny him his 2255, deny him his demand to get all this material looked at. That was Rene Alexander Acosta, who then became Trump's Treasury Secretary. Labor Secretary. So he has to be, I think, hung upside down and hit like a piñata, because Rene Alexander Acosta has all of the intelligence about Brad Birkenfeld and the Swiss banks. And this is billions of dollars. The whole reason that the Swiss bank issue is key is because it represents billions of dollars that were used by the Saudis and the Qataris and the United Arab Emirates and the whole wealth of countries that were in U.S. Central Command's area of operation. That includes Egypt, Sudan, Eritrea, Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia, the Seychelles, Yemen, Oman, United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, Iran, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan. All of those countries were utilizing the financial streams and resources in some way or another to facilitate Wahhabi terrorism in the Middle East that was being used to harm U.S. troops and at the same time justify U.S. Central Command of the military-industrial complex for being there in the first place. All of this was just moving money, again, shell game, moving money and intelligence around the table. But what they did, and what Rene Alexander Acosta did, is he took the big piece of intelligence, which was Brad Birkenfeld, bringing in over all the WikiLeaks cables and the bank accounts and the phone numbers and the hotel rooms and the client lists, everything that was later reported in the Panama Papers. Brad Birkenfeld originally brought that over in 2007-8, and then Rene Alexander Acosta prosecuted him in 2009 and threw him in prison. Hillary Clinton was part of it.
I like it that you
and
call
all
him
that money.
Rene Alexander Acosta, because it almost sounds like how his mother would address him if she was super pissed off, which we can tell that you are. Now, Scott, people are telling us in the comments that Governor DeSantis has opened an investigation into this
Yeah.
sweetheart deal. However, just the other day, I had an interview with former Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office Deputy John Mark Dugan, whistleblower on major corruption in Palm Beach County, to the extent that his life was threatened and he had to escape to Russia. John tells us that using the Florida FDE, something like that, Florida FLE, the Florida Law Enforcement Association or something like that. John expects that that will be an invalid and ineffective investigation because he cited investigations they've done in the past that simply relied on faulty evidence, and the individuals who were involved in that were also involved with the people they were investigating. There seems to be this really not well understood by the public, but pretty well understood by the people in charge, clique of individuals who are able to investigate each other and seem to consistently find that no sensible prosecutor would do anything against the crimes that they do.
Yeah, well, that's where the racket comes in. That's where when Acosta says, I was told it was above my pay grade and this was an intelligence operation and he belonged to intelligence, well, that opens up the door. Well, two things. It shows that the American government, the American Department of Justice, and the American intelligence agencies are not working for the American people. They're working on their own agenda, which they try and camouflage and persuade and deceive the American people into believing it's in their interest. And it's not. It's in their own paycheck justification of their social ladder and their professional development, much like the military is too. The military isn't about winning wars and destroying the enemies and coming back home. It's about perpetuating war in order to perpetuate careers. It's to make people go from captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel, and general, and then get soft, cushy jobs as contractors or get teaching positions at the Monterey Language Institute or places like that. That's what most of these beta male types go into the military and do. That's why that's why America, I think, is in such a dire malaise of political correctness and effeminacy and stupidity when it comes to the manly warrior alpha males that are supposed to exist. They're attacked from all sides at all times, but that's the affliction that we're suffering. So what we see with Acosta turning away because it's intelligence, that should all be examined. That should all be brought out. DeSantis knows about our material. We've shared it with him and many other congressmen. But I think if this is opened up and the American people investigate it the way that they want, you will see that this was an intelligence operation that's been sacrificing American kids, letting this thing go for creating blackmail operations. Barr has appointed also Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz to be looking into Epstein's death. So, Jason, one thing that can be done is to contact the Inspector General's office at the Department of Justice, Inspector General Michael Horowitz, and he'll have staff and stuff there, but he'll have a Justice Department Public Affairs Office or the Office of Public Responsibility or the Office of the Inspector General himself, and all of the materials and autopsies and information relating to Epstein should be given by the Inspector General's office. They're the ones doing the investigation. I
don't see that happening, Scott. I mean, Michael Horowitz has so far done nothing. I have a feeling all those staff members you're describing would be very adept at telling people to go away, call back, hang up, etc. But I would be shocked if any of these offices were forthcoming with any of this information because there's been so much coverage of this Epstein story. I will admit it has stayed in the mainstream news longer than I expected. I'm loath to anticipate this, but probably any second we should expect a mass shooting to distract people from this. As a matter of fact, we had two within 12 hours just a few days before. Haven't heard a thing about either of those. since then.
Well, the House Judiciary Committee too will have answers on the Bureau of Prisons and relating to the warden and this whole jail. So those are the leads that can be pursued for information or deception. Remember, you never know where someone's going to let something slip that's going to be contradicted by another agency or person. So the House Judiciary Committee and staffers and all of that can be compelled to provide the name of the prior warden, provide the name of, whatever it is, the autopsy reports, the documentation, where is this being held? There's just an article in the Hill. The House Judiciary leaders demand answers from the Bureau of Prisons.
Right.
So we'll see. But of course, if this is a prisoner, putting him into the prisoner relocation program or things like that, it's because they recognize the intelligence potentiality that Epstein has. He is very similar to that Rosenberg who sold the nuclear secrets to the Soviets in the 1950s. That's how huge Epstein could be. Not because he's anything special, but because he was put in place to be the spider web to hold together the structure in which they would drop the little honey bait of these little girls and little boys for the depravity, the lustings of people like Bill Clinton, or people that are on his book. Who's been named? Horowitz, Clinton, Prince Andrew. All sorts of people. There's a big list of people that needs to be brought down on this. So Epstein represents, just like in a sense, Julian Assange. Julian Assange represents one of the greatest intelligence assets that the Department of Justice and the President and the White House could use to determine the depths of these deep state international coup d'etat that was used against the president. Julian Assange also has the WikiLeaks cables that expose the Renee Alexander Acosta and the Hillary Clinton and the Department of Justice deal with Switzerland to bury all the financial intelligence that were part of the terrorist financing. So all of this stuff is coming into focus, and they're all separate, but they're also interconnected. So Epstein and his role in the child trafficking thing, Acosta's connection to Epstein, Acosta's connection to Birkenfeld, all of this stuff can get a little bit overwhelming, but if you map it out, you see that Julian Assange too is involved because of the WikiLeaks intelligence that he provided. And if he is still in a British prison, then Trump is an idiot and has blood on his hands. If he's not, if he's squirreled away, secreted away somewhere, then he's not as dumb. He's smart, because I know personally the WikiLeaks cables, and I saw them firsthand, that had been smuggled into the prison that Brad Birkenfeld had. Funny enough, under James Petrucci, James Petrucci allowed all this stuff to be coming in. James Petrucci allowed Scott Bennett's report to get out. James Petrucci read a lot of Scott Bennett's mail, because I remember him calling me down to the office saying, "Bennett, what's all this stuff?" And he had opened up my folder. I said, "Well, it's legal mail. I'm sending it out, And that's what scared him. I thought he thought, "Who is this guy? He's sending out Swiss bank material and intelligence." And by this time, Birkenfeld had got out. So
but that's known when you're in prison, that they're going to open your mail and read it, right? I mean, you lose your right to, because you could be planning an escape or whatever.
Yeah. Well, I titled it legal mail because it was legal, but it didn't bother me. I had nothing to hide.
Sorry, Scott. When you were there, did you see any blatant corruption going on? Somebody paying a guard to turn off a camera so they could strangle somebody, or a guard going off duty, or anything that you would describe as rampant corruption there?
But I didn't see it in the Schuylkill, the minimal facility that I was at. I did see a guy hang himself in Pennsylvania. He was again child pornography or child sexual pedophilia or something like that. I think it was a Russian guy, and he did hang himself in his cell allegedly.
Did someone help him with that, or he actually did it?
I don't know. You're not given you're put in lockdown, and they shut it down, and they just say that someone died. That could have been false, though. Come to think about it, he could have been That could have been the same sort of Epstein operation. They pretend that you're dead. They pretend that you kill yourself. And if this guy, he was a Russian, they could
Right.
have done a little secret Russian swap. They did this too with two guys that were from the Netherlands and Luxembourg, who were big time executives in Cargo Lux. And these guys had been thrown in for some BS monopolization thing, and they then kept them in Schuylkill prison for 6 months. And then we played soccer with them all the time. We had a big soccer team up there. And then they were released quietly back to their home countries. And they were great guys. They were the ones who told me about Putin and China, as well as the TWA plane that was shot down over
Flight 800.
New York.
Yeah.
Yeah, New York with a missile. They had seen, and all of their executives had looked into this. And these guys were put in jail, and it was ridiculous. It's so laughable and ridiculous, but it's also a torturous indication of how bad the United States is becoming, because we are becoming a prison state. We're becoming a prison state where they need to keep that going, that operational going. Geo services that everyone's crying and yelling about, they were the ones who were working with the Obama administration on teaching the class Deep Black, which I've got in the book Shell Game. Deep Black was the Geo Services Obama administration syllabus, teaching the CIA and Mossad were running drug operations and assassinating military people that were trying to expose and stop the drug trafficking from South America, from Afghanistan, from Southeast Asia for the past 20, 30 years. That Deep Black class was being taught to prisoners, telling them that the CIA was in charge of all drug operations. Essentially, get with the program, join the team, or else you're going to be put back in jail for 25 years. Wow. That was Geo Services, the Bureau of Prisons, and the Obama administration.
Unbelievable. There's so much for us to talk about. I'm getting a lot of info from the comments. Spanman has shared this video from the fantastic Syrian girl. I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, and I haven't spoken to her in a little while, but this is a video that I think people should take a look at. You can just search for Syrian Girl Partisan on YouTube and check out all of her videos. She's been a guest on the show before. She has some great insights and information, so I'll be interested in looking at that. You know, we've got this whole question of, was it a body double leaving the or entering the hospital that the New York Post managed to get two quick snaps of? Hard to say. Some people are saying these ears are the same. Some people are saying they're different. I mean, this is really not the way we can conduct an official investigation, but it's surprising that hasn't been done. We've also got, someone sent me this right here, 5 fast facts you need to know, which is heavy.com. That's their standard format. I don't know if this is accurate or not. This is telling us Donald Barr did hire Epstein. A lot of people point out that Donald Barr left as headmaster a few weeks or a few months or some short amount of time prior to Epstein coming in there. I don't know if him being there or not being there is definitive as to whether or not he had anything to do with him getting hired. I find it interesting that he was a New York Times book reviewer. We've spoken to the editor of the New York Times book review, and he is a proud member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And also, Donald Barr wrote 2 science fiction books about interplanetary slavery and sexual domination. I wonder if these were children on Mars in the book. We'd have to read it to find out. But it is interesting, and it takes me back to a book that a former associate of mine told us all about, that book, My Friend, Mr. Leakey, which was written by, I think the guy's name was J.D. Haldane, who was like a genetic scientist and wrote all kinds of physics books and everything. And then he just happened to write one bizarre children's book that was loaded with steganographic messages. If people have read any of the books written by Donald Barr, it might be curious to know if there is some sort of coded messaging in there. I think it's very weird to walk around with 6 pens, exactly the same pens, neatly arranged with a separator. And I mean, what the hell is going on with all those pens? Makes no sense to me. We've got just a few minutes here, Scott.
remember he was connected to George Bush Sr. George Bush
Absolutely.
Sr. has been connected to the Kennedy assassination. George Bush Sr., of course, was the CIA. George Bush Sr. was connected with Reagan's assassination and Hinckley. George Bush Sr. was
Attempted
responsible for the invasion
assassination.
of Panama.
The attempted assassination. Of course, they didn't succeed at assassinating Ronald Reagan.
Right, right.
Yeah,
But
I mean,
George Bush Sr. is the hub, so you could see how Barr the son comes in because Barr the father is connected with George Bush Sr. So Barr the father and George Bush Sr. Have obviously connections interfacing somewhere, and then the son is tapped and blessed and given the Godfather nod from the Godfather, child pedophile, rapist, murderer, Kennedy assassin, George Bush Sr. So
well,
there's
Tammy C is in the comments, Scott, reminding us that we shouldn't blame the son for the father's sins. However, it is interesting to note that they like to keep this sort of business in the family, right? If they find someone who they trust and like, it's much easier to trust that guy's son than it is to find somebody completely new who maybe you don't know. And I mean, I've seen it in Hollywood. Nepotism is rampant. So we're not blaming him for the sins of the father. We're just questioning, what was Donald Barr all about?
Well, and we're holding them all up to a standard of righteousness and accountability, and we are demanding what is the right thing to do for the American citizen, and the right policies and the right expression of government. And we're not trying to be romantic or Pollyanna-ish. We're trying to have a United States government that is by and for and through the people, not this elite, corrupt oligarchy that engages in Epstein's sexual depravity and drug trafficking and all sorts of international wars, for God's sake. This is why people are standing up. This is why people don't trust the mainstream media. That's why they get sick and tired and enraged and throw shoes at the television.
Yeah.
That's why they get sickened when they look at the beta males who talk in a monotone voice. That's why the average person gets really upset and riled, is because in their core DNA, they sense a sickening perversion and corruption at the highest levels of government, the highest levels of the church and academia and media, and they just aren't in a position to show that outrage. But that it's important for them to feel it. Anger can be a very good energizer and a very good impulse to be able to challenge lies and liars and these sort of deception operations. Yeah. And it can also provoke some people to rise up and run for political office based entirely on the realities that we know with the internet and shows like yours, Jason. The realities and the subject matter and the perspectives and evidence that you give to people, they can put into their arrow quiver and go out and run for office and destroy everybody on the platform. If I was running for office against all these nuts on the Democrat committee, I would destroy them all, including Tulsi Gabbard.
I was going to say, Scott, when it comes to getting angry at liars, you are like the Energizer Bunny, my friend. So as far as anger energizing, that's a good example for people to see. We're just out of time, unfortunately, for today. Jen Sowers is asking us, what about the envelopes at George H.W. Bush Sr.'s funeral? We don't know. We're going to have to find out perhaps in a future episode. I want to remind everyone to visit shellgamewhistleblower.com. That is Scott's webpage. And if you do not yet have the book Shell Game, this is the place to order it from. You can click on the donate button and send Scott some money, or you can purchase the book and read what he discovered about the terror financing ties between the Union Bank of Switzerland, contractors to our clandestine services, and various individuals who are in those clandestine services. I also want to direct people over to Scott's Patreon page. You can go to what is this now? A new way to, I got a message here from Patreon. But people can go to patreon.com/shellgame and support Scott. I would ask people to remember that Crowdsource the Truth is brought to you by viewer sponsorship. There are no major corporate sponsors, and I am extremely reluctant to put the financing of Crowdsource the Truth into the hands of major corporations like Google, who would surely put a strangle grip around Crowdsource the Truth, not dissimilar to what may have happened to Jeffrey Epstein, breaking bones in his neck. So please go over to patreon.com/crowdsource the truth or subscribestar.com/crowdsource the truth. We had a really great episode of More Pain just the other day with Michael Moore of True Pundit. Coming up tonight, we've got at 5 p.m., the newest show, we've got Dr. Corsi's Prescription for America. That'll be at 5 p.m. And then at 7 p.m., the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. So join us on Patreon. Scott, thanks so much for a great report. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Jason. You're doing a great job, pal.
Thank you, Scott. And thanks, everybody, for watching.